Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Apartment Department, the podcast for multifamily marketers by multifamily marketers. We have a really, really special podcast today because I am super happy to announce that the band is back together. The band, of course, being myself, Chris Johnson, and Sarah Wieman, who is the regional manager of Reach by Rent Cafe, which is Yardy's marketing agency. The three of us spoke at AIM together in 2024. We've done one podcast together and we had so much fun that we knew we had to have Sarah back. And besides having so much fun, the reason we really wanted to bring Sarah back is because Sarah works as a regional manager at Reach by Rent Cafe. She really is at the forefront of what multifamily companies and multifamily marketers need right now in order to be successful. And so we've asked Sarah to come back and join us. And really today we want to talk about the trend of efficiency. And that's really a broad topic, but it covers a lot of different things. It covers the idea of kind of vendor and technology efficiency. It covers the idea of utilizing AI to be more efficient in our day-to-day. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Hey friends, it's so good to see you guys. I'm glad the band's all back together. Thank you for the wonderful intro and to all the listeners. It's so fun to actually be here in 2025. I hope everyone had like safe, happy, healthy holidays. 25 is off to a interesting and exciting, I think, fun start for our industry. And there's been a lot that's gone on in a really short period of time. I mean, granted, we are in month 3, but in the last like 8 weeks, we've seen huge announcements like the acquisition of LCP Media by Yardy, which is only going to enhance like our marketing agency and our clients' experience with content, to some big changes with some of those ILS vendors out there. So I think it's an exciting time to actually talk about this with you both and also get your perspectives on what you're seeing from your firm's ideas and initiatives for this year.
Yeah, no,
Chris, Chris, how are you doing over there?
Great. It's so good to have you back. I love talking to you, Sarah. You bring such a unique perspective because you've been on both sides. And so it's really great to hear about what you're working on and how we can relate it back to our programs. Whenever we speak, and we do this offline too, we all learn from each other. So this is an exciting time. I'm curious, before we get into it, do you think there's going to be more consolidation this year? Or do you think we're done this year, but over the next couple, we're going to see more? Because I think we're going to have more. I just don't know when it's going to happen.
I I think from maybe surprised announcements that, none of us were really expecting, to speak to that, like Zillow and Rent and that big announcement that came out recently. I hope that there aren't a lot of more big guys that come together in that sense, because I think that it did create a shift from an industry perspective on, um, how big companies are working together. But I mean, the exciting thing for LCP Media and Yardy is there's new efficiencies created there for the content that LCP generates for our clients and how we are able to integrate the content directly into our websites and taking some of that lift off of our clients. I think that's a really exciting integration. And I know we can't speak publicly to all the new companies that might be announcing at different conferences this year, but I think we're also going to see some new players out there, and some companies that might come in and create paradigm shifts when it comes to those efficiencies. I think a lot of those new firms that we see coming are probably going to have AI at their forefront in a much more robust capacity than maybe some of the legacy companies that are working to bring AI into their current environments. New firms are hitting the ground with all of their kit and caboodles pulled together when it comes to some of these efficiencies. So I don't know. I think it's a mix. What do you guys think?
I don't know. I think that this is kind of going to be a broad answer, but I think in general, this stuff is kind of cyclical, right? Where, I mean, I remember years and years ago when uh Bing and Yahoo merged in order to try. I mean, that was like a million years ago, but um they try. So for context, I used to work a lot with kind of like multi-location businesses, kind of franchise brands and other things. And so all the time in that industry we would see these kind of rises. So basically, we would see consolidation of technologies. So, there would be a bunch of startups, and then they would either start dying off or they would start consolidating, getting bought by a bigger company. And then you'd see all of these players merge into a couple large players. And then it was almost like the industry got sick of there only being a couple choices. And then you would start to see all these startups pop up again, and people had a lot of choices. And so that's what I mean by cyclical. I think right now we're kind of in this era of, from a multifamily standpoint, a little bit of both, where we are seeing, I think, some consolidations, but we're also continuing to see some like larger new players kind of pop on the scene, and really make sure that as an industry we're moving forward, because that's exactly what kind of new technologies do, is they keep us all honest, right? And they allow us to move forward together.
Yeah, I love that. I think too, like for us with the shift specifically towards like the ILSs consolidating a little bit more, we've taken a really thorough look at like rentcafe.com and how we can continue to be a great marketplace in the industry for our customers to use. And we this year have a whole new pricing structure that were launched in February, actually, a whole new pricing structure. And I, as someone who's sat on the client side and I'm now sitting on the vendor side, when I think about the pricing structure, we're actually just going to do a flat rate for like all of every tier of the listings. So it's a flat rate to just be on our marketplace. And then every year we look at an algorithm. And if your occupancy exposure is 7% or more, you automatically get bumped up to the top positions on those listings. And then, 4 to 6.99%, you fall into like our middle bucket of listings. And then if you have 3.99% of exposure or less, you're at the bottom for that month, and then the next month the algorithm changes. And I think that's also something, you know, when I was on the client side and you heard about these big consolidations of firms, I think the number one thing I always thought was like, our price is going to go up. How is the pricing going to change? And with rentcafe.com and our ILS and our marketplace, we really looked at that to be like, can we do something from a pricing standpoint that looks at this differently for our clients to meet them on their occupancy needs and not break the bank for them?
See, that's
So I think it makes people think
what I'm
differently.
talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
See, here's where I'm getting. I think our industry is finally moving more tech, and it's been so slow to get there. And I think some of these consolidations are showing you that maybe the tech was catching up, and there are other players out there. There are other ways for us to reach potential customers, and we don't have to spend an arm and a leg. I know that over the years I've gotten smarter with my marketing. I don't have the same marketing plan for every property. They're different based on their need. And I continue to do that now. And I think with all the consolidations, it'll be easier to do so. I think it's great that you already offer something based on occupancy or exposure, because that's how I do my marketing. That's how Anne looks at her marketing. We did a whole session on what we do for operations that's different as marketing leaders. So it's kind of a breath of fresh air to hear that. But I think the new players coming on are definitely going to have to be tech savvy. We're not going to be the dinosaur industry anymore. We can't. We have to catch up. There's too much competition, and our renters. I tell people this all the time. I tell my staff, the people, not my staff, but the on-site staff all the time. When somebody's walking in the door, no longer the days that they were literally just driving by. They know you 85% of the time, unless they happen to go to your neighbor and then they're like, oh, I'm in the neighborhood. They already know what they're getting. They already know the price. They know the location. They've done their research. It's at their fingertips these days. And so we just have to work with it.
I think you make a really interesting point there that the prospect's knowledge is changing, and with the, ever increasing use of cell phones, and now with AI taking over so many capacities of the digital space, like I'm dyslexic. I use ChatGPT every single day to proofread emails because it's a very helpful tool for me. It creates a new efficiency where I'm not sitting there proofreading myself, second guessing, like, is an I and an E in the right place? It's created a new efficiency. And I think that's another component where AI is changing how we develop SEO. We're adding GEO. so people can write those long-tailed questions of like, what's the best neighborhood, say in Philadelphia, where I can find a 1-bedroom? And they don't just get a list of properties with 1-bedrooms. They actually get information about that email pertaining to average rents in that area, and or how many restaurants and entertainment facilities are around there for them to have like an active lifestyle if that's what they're interested in. So I think AI is creating a different type of efficiency too, not just on the renter side, but also on the management side. We're adding AI into our marketing IQ suite to help our clients write blogs, keep up with Google business posts, update narratives more regularly. And I know, like, for both of you, you both have sizable portfolios. I mean, Anne, you have a large portfolio under your belt too. And um, it's a lot of work to keep up with everything if you wanted to have a blog post every week for every property, or you wanted to have a Google business post for every property every week. So how can we as a vendor better support our clients to achieve the goals that they have, to also accommodate these new ways of searching or showing up in like results?
Yeah, I think that's interesting because ultimately a lot of these changes that we're seeing are being driven by how prospects are changing in terms of the way that they search and what they expect. Like you said, they're expecting information about a property before they even go in there. And so that means, we have to have photos. The way that they're searching is different. And so I think that's really interesting too, that a lot of like the technology changes that we're seeing aren't necessarily being driven by technology for technology's sake, but it's really, shaped around the changing behavior of consumers.
I think too, like, we as a group are really trying to listen to clients. And I know that in 2024, we got a lot of feedback from some of our clients that have big national footprints about websites and website management. So we've been working to re-engineer site options to where you could have, say, like neighborhood websites. So inside of those neighborhood websites, you might have like 6 or 7 properties within a neighborhood. You still want to highlight that individual property and showcase, availability, amenities, the local, like a local area map, what FAQs, results, reviews and testimonials for those individual properties, but also creating an efficiency that you might have that series of properties close by to each other, and a neighborhood page can actually help accommodate all of them. And so we have new models of websites out, which is just based off feedback of clients, that while property websites, I still think for the majority of clients are going to be one of the more popular options, especially given that not every client has pockets of properties all over the place. But I think when you get to be a certain size, like, is it really efficient to have 100 separate websites or 15 separate websites or 20 separate property websites? Or would it be more efficient to be able to cluster those together and maybe consolidate down to a few websites, but still achieve the same goal of getting that exposure?
Well, here's what, sorry, Ann.
Oh, no, go.
Look, because that's what we used to do. We used to have a sample for all of our sites, and then we split it, and now we're back. But I talked about this with advertising.
Yeah.
And I'm going to test it this year with actually having a landing page for my advertisements. So I can actually track it 1-to-1 instead of going to the main site and just seeing if I can get some more traction on it. That's what we used to do. But it just goes back to the beginning of this conversation, and you were talking about it's cyclical and things go away, they come back. But we all had single domains 15 years ago.
Yeah, I think, and the efficiency, like we used to do the very same thing for franchise systems, where if you had 7 locations of one franchise in a city, well, you wouldn't drive. We would make we called them metro pages. And so like Denver Metro had all of the franchise locations in that metro, and that's where we drove the pay-per-click traffic. And guess what? It was, from an efficiency standpoint, one, there was a bigger brand footprint. So all of a sudden a consumer knew that there were 7 locations of this business instead of 1. 2, each of those locations didn't have to be running their own pay-per-click campaign. They were only running one. And so the amount of money that they were putting into advertising was minimized. And so I think again, this fits in a lot with a couple things that people are talking about about right now. One, marketing efficiencies. Like with, fair housing, you basically have to have like a 25-mile radius in your pay-per-click campaigns. Well, if you have multiple locations together, your radiuses are then overlapping. You're basically bidding on the same keywords. So inefficient. Instead, you take everyone to a landing page, Chris, like you're talking about. All of a sudden, you have a $5,000 a month campaign across, you know, whatever, I can't do math, 5 locations, and as opposed to a 2,000 for each one, and you're saving half your budget. And I think we're hearing people talk a lot about this idea of maybe building brands for their property management companies. And so then when you're thinking about those like kind of metro pages or whatever, does that allow you to build brands based on the asset type or like geographic location, and just embrace a new concept?
Oh, I think that's, yeah, again, going back to this idea of like the circle of life, everything comes back in a new capacity. But if you think about years ago when we did have single domains, I don't think we had the understanding like we do today of how SEO and Google Ads really worked. And I think we created a shift to go say, let's do hyper local. Everything stands on their own 2 feet. And we learned the strategies behind making that efficient. And now, like, we are going to have to revamp or relearn a little bit of our best practices to accommodate these neighborhood sites or these larger websites in order to keep driving the traffic to the individual properties. But I really think with like AI and the support that AI is giving to search results, to the renter's experience of finding you, even though there's more information consolidated into one URL into one place, there's other ways to filter it out now that we didn't have 10 years ago in our industry. So like, it's like going to like Marriott's website, you can find every Marriott in the world there. But if I Google hotel in downtown New York, Marriott's are still going to show up. So they've clearly figured out a way in the hotel industry to accomplish both their branding and their hyper local finds. So
Yeah, I feel like we used to call this like dual domain presence. Like there's a word for this. Like it exists. I will find it and I will send it to you guys, but there is a concept that exists. Um, and another thing that this fits into is this, I'm sure you guys have heard people talking about kind of having like a private ILS, like making their company website a private ILS. So we've basically hit 3 trends with one idea. So I'm proud of us.
I'm proud of us too.
That's what the man does when we get back together.
Trends abound.
I'm curious for you guys, like Reach, we've done a lot to like incorporate things into our softwares. Like we talked about our marketing IQ and how we have Virtuoso, our AI engine, sitting there to help with like blog writing and Google business posts. And on the back end of some of our website stuff, we have AI to help support, alt tagging and things to create those efficiencies for our clients. But for you both in 2025, on top of all of your initiatives, like what are some of the top 3 that you're looking at that actually might create like new efficiencies for your team or how you're managing stuff differently? Has anything changed for you both?
You want to go first, Sam, or you want me to go?
Oh yeah, I've got. Okay, so got a thing. So this is new. I don't know if we're gonna be able to do it, but here's a problem we're having. We have listings. So let's say we have a property, right? Well, it has a property website. It has a Google My Business listing. It has a listing on, let's say, 4 ILSs, just kind of for starters. Well, in our case, we use Yardi, and so all of that information feeds from one central place. However, sometimes where the information starts and where it finishes, the information isn't the same, right? Connections don't always work, whatever. I mean, that's fine. Well, right now, it's a very manual process for us to go through and look at all of those listings for one property and confirm. I mean, we do it. Like, of course, we do that. And then we have like a local listing kind of accuracy tool that helps us as well. But something that I would like to figure out is there like a scraping tool available, or can I use ChatGPT to help me utilize technologies that already exist to build a scraping tool where I could basically say like, hey, go to apartmentlist.com, find all of these locations, tell me the information that exists on those listings, and then tell me if it matches our centralized like source of truth. And so if I could figure that out, that would be a huge win because all of our information would be accurate and, our connections would be as good as they possibly could be to make sure leads were flowing in properly, that we're giving residents or prospects the best experience. I'll give you an example. We found a listing the other day and it said we had a $0 pet fee. Well, that's not true. And then if someone came in for a tour and thought that there was a $0 pet fee, and then we are like, well, actually it's $50, whatever the case, like that's already putting them on the wrong foot. But like for us to find that is a very manual process. So it doesn't exist, but I will find a way.
I mean, if you find a way, I think you have a business there, because when I was a client, I would have paid thousands of dollars for someone to scrub my listings. I used to have this like Microsoft form that every quarter I would send all of our managers, and I would make the managers fill out the form. And then I would have my team go in and make all the edits and like the discrepancies that they found. And I did find that over time, since we made it a requirement, and if, we held the management teams accountable on filling out the form, over time, I started to notice less and less errors.
That makes sense. It's just kind of becomes a habit. So I like that. Maybe if my scraping tool fails, I'll just use a Google form on a quarterly basis.
Oh no, I think you're onto something with ChatGPT though. Leverage that open AI. Chris, what about you?
I mean, well, here's the thing, just on your point, I literally am sending this out this week to do our digital audits for our teams, and I have a whole form for them to fill out, and then we're going to fix it. But I always frame it as help us help you.
Yeah.
You have one property, we have many, and your property, we don't. And let me just tell you about that source of truth, because I just ran into this with an ILS, and I won't name names. They had an automated AI FAQ that they pulled, and they were pulling information about washer and dryer that was wrong. And they pulled it from like one random section of my source of truth instead of like the section that I focus on. And so I had to go figure out where that's coming from, how to change it, go find this like little spot where like it was clicked when it shouldn't have been. It was a whole mess for one little FAQ on washer and dryers. And so I feel your pain on that. Let's get that scraping tool. But in that case, I was AI, Sarah, from another company that pulled info and was wrong. So we do have to be careful with it. I use it every day, literally every day. I use it to help me write my own descriptions. I go out to the ILSs where I can put in the source of truth, and I throw the website in and I say what I'm trying to do. I want it to be SEO friendly, this many characters. And then I go do my edits to make sure it's kind of in a voice that isn't AI body. We use it for events. We use it for consolidating data. We're using AI for all kinds of projects that would have taken us hours and now take seconds in my department. And I encourage my team to use it. We do a lot of video, and that's been my thing this year. And I think I shared one of our videos that we just did, and we're really having fun with it. Our scripts are written in AI because that takes 20 seconds, and then we can edit it instead of us trying to figure it out. Video for me, Sarah, this year is the big thing that I'm really pushing. I think video is so important. I'm even pushing video for our company announcements now, our company newsletter that we're starting.
I love that.
That's writing. When we're running these contests, I've told my team, we're going to give 4 updates. 2 of them need to be video updates with graphics on who's doing what, at the halfway point and at the end. Because why would we make people read stuff today when I have a great team that create this video and these graphics, and we have AI tools to help us do it? So video for me is the big push to be different and to be able to compete with the gray stars of the world and do something that's a little bit different. And I've been given the green light to do so. We're having so much fun with our marketing program right now. I've never had this much fun in my life, except for maybe at the very beginning when Google was first coming out and websites were first coming out and we're trying to figure it out. But I have a whole new tech stack, and I have a team that's creative, and we're just coming to work and smiling and laughing and creating this fun stuff. That's just different. It's different for the industry. And even my websites that I've done are different. They're not templated. So I think that's the biggest thing with our industry. When I started looking at tech stack, and I had a very supportive boss and executive team that said it's okay to be different. And so that was a big initiative last year for us, is to be different. How can we be different? And it's not that the templated websites are bad. They're fine. They look great, but we wanted to stand out. When somebody came to our side, we wanted them to be like, hey, this is different. This isn't like the person next door, especially in our hypersensitive competitive markets.
Well, I think more and more companies too, like we have, I mean, Rent Cafe, we have 100 templates that people can design and customize to their branding space. And I think there are lots of properties that fit that mold really well. I would say, I probably would still say the majority, just out of an efficiency standpoint, to say like, and for example, you might say, okay, for all of our garden style properties, we want the same template, but we have different color variations, or town might have a certain like layout that they want for everything. But then I've had some really neat clients this year come in. And when I was a client, I built some custom sites too with Reach, and it was a wonderful experience. But I think there's these little facets now coming in, like not necessarily like fly-in graphics of like a photo coming across and pairing up with, a container of copy, but we have some folks that are doing some stylized like illustrations where like the butterflies in the background move, but the stylized like people don't. So I think some of those components are definitely becoming more popular to distinguish like property per property. And especially because my client book sits primarily in New York. My team covers, Delaware up through New England and then all of Canada. But I'm seeing more and more in New York, like these super funky buildings that have really interesting stories and brands, and they want the websites to really showcase like what that is. Like I went into not a multifamily site, but I went into a hotel recently called the Carlisle. There's a really cool documentary about it online. If you guys are interested, if you're ever in New York, highly recommend going. But the gentleman who did the illustrations for Madeline hand painted like all the wallpaper. And I got in there and I thought to myself, like, if I was building a website for this hotel, I would make that wallpaper part of the design of my website. So I feel like stuff like that is starting to come to like life more digitally too. I was like, this is neat. Like,
Well, I actually did create templates for my company, but each property has its own flair to it, which makes it special. But I also put information different too. I mean, it just displays a little bit different than what we've been doing. And again, nobody has the right answer. I always try to find the niche to compete and what's going to make me just a little bit different than the person next door.
I love that. I think every company has their own special sauce to make them distinguish, whether it's like from the creative component to digitally make your digital doorstep stand out different than the competition, or say there's this like hype coming for resident experience and resident retention. I know a lot of companies are starting to really hyper focus on how can they keep people longer and what does that culture inside of the four walls of a property look like. And I feel like either direction is the right way depending on where a company is in a given time. But Chris, I'd be curious to have this conversation again like a year from now and see, now that you have like your digital doorstep up and it's in a space that you love it so much, and your foundation of efficiencies are creative, do you create what comes next? Like, I'm so curious of what comes next once you get that fully honed out.
Me too. I want to what other technologies I can bring in that are going to help me get the word out. I just think it's interesting. I think you just said something that was interesting though. We're in 2025. Apartments have been around forever. All of us have been doing this a long time. And you just said a lot of companies are starting to focus on retention. And it's odd to me that more companies haven't just said we want to retain our residents and made that a focus. It was almost like we just said, fine, we're okay with losing 40 to 60% of our residents every year, and we're just going to keep filling it up. And that's just the game, instead of the opposite of like, how can we keep 90% and, 10% you can't do anything about because, life changes. But it's just kind of interesting to see those kind of shifts too, because it's like, well, duh,
That, when we talked with Jude not years ago, God, last year, from Flamingo, 95 years ago. No, like last year. That's what he said. I mean, he was like, in other industries, like, a software or technology industry, like a client retention of eight, I'm not going to remember the exact figure, but let's say like 80%. He's like, that's the standard. And, for some reason in multifamily, we've decided that 50% retention rate is okay. He's like, why are we doing this to ourselves? And I thought, that's kind of always stuck because Chris, that's exactly what it is. And eventually, if you're losing residents, it's because you're not providing a good experience. If you're not providing a good experience, you will have a bad reputation. If you have a bad reputation, you can't charge as much money for I mean, like, there's only so big of a pool of residents, like, and then it costs more money to get people, and then you have to give more concessions. And so it's not only like kind of the cost, like when you lose residents, it's not only the cost of like the marketing and like the turnover and like the lost occupancy, but it's like there's something else going on that eventually will kind of erode the property and put you in a really, really bad spot.
Well, I think it's neat too, like when we talk about retention, what are ways that from an efficiency, going back to this idea of like efficiencies, what are ways that we can help residents feel more supported once they find like their happy place in your community to call home? And I was on a client demo recently with our dear friend Paul Yant. Have to give him a little plug here, and we were showing our Chat IQ software and how a resident could go on and chat with the omni-channel and talk about maintenance stuff, basically to put a maintenance request in. But a new feature that I observed was like it also offered prompts to help a resident solve the problem themselves too, without necessarily needing that work order. And that to me, from a maintenance standpoint, is so impactful because now maintenance teams, maybe the resident can reset the garbage disposal themselves with that little red button or figure out how the air filter needs to go in, and maintenance can really focus on those big projects that make a huge impact on somebody's life. Not to say that 100% of these small work orders would go away, but I would feel like empowered, I think, as a resident if I got a prompt that taught me how to do something new where I got to create my own efficiency to better my life inside of my home. And I was like, this idea of like AI is now impacting also the resident experience. And I think that's just one small example of how. I know there's like rewards programs out there now and other things to incentivize residents to stay. But I think when residents become more and more comfortable of calling your communities home, their intent to live there longer increases. And that's how you really get that like long-term loyal resident to your community.
I mean, really, it's about customer service and how you treat people. And at the end of the day, you're going to have residents that special shop. And like, I was a renter for a long time and I moved every year because I would get a deal. Even within the community, I would transfer maybe, when I lived in California. So you're going to have people like me regardless. But I think a lot of people don't want to move. They don't like change. And if they're treated well and you take care of their maintenance and the property looks good and they can count on the staff, then you're going to be ahead of the game. And then we can use that in our marketing material.
Well, then I think all these things too, when you like have your stabilized foundation for marketing and your properties reach a point where you're not having an eroded population every year, you're sort of able to predict, okay, we get 12, 14, maybe 20 vacancies a year. We've stabilized our marketing needs throughout the year. Then once you can start to rationalize places where you might not need to spend for outbound marketing, and you can pull that back in and spend it on like events or, a resident gift at Christmas or a different type of incentive for them, then that loyalty only grows. And even if they have to move out of your one community, they're going to remember, and maybe they go to another one of your communities because they know that experience would be the same.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And what are you seeing, Sarah, that your clients' marketing teams are also starting to include customer experience?
Yeah, I think, well, for one, I think active adult obviously sets the tone for what a lifestyle like marketing package looks like at a property. I was talking to a client recently, their whole portfolio is active adult. And the amount of money they sink into those activities, I'm like, I wish when I was on the client side, I could have parties like that for just regular market rate, multifamily communities. I have a really unique client in New York that's primarily all affordable, and we built them a new website to market all of their properties nationally. And I was really um impressed with how thoughtfully they put content together to speak about the programs they have available for support to their residents. I feel a lot of times people aren't always open and transparent from that perspective on letting folks know about different opportunities when it comes to an affordable portfolio or places to live. And they were very honest, but it was very honest and warm. And I was like, even the way people are writing this stuff is different. And then from a market rate standpoint, I think, um, absolutely, I think companies are starting to do more when it comes to events and lifestyle opportunities, or partnering with local businesses to offer, like, say, a free coffee a month at a coffee shop that's located inside of one of the buildings or down the street. One of I had the opportunity to hire two really cool new people on my team. I have a really wonderful team to begin with, but New York has been like a big project of mine, and we have two new folks joining me in New York that'll help support clients there. And during the interview process with the one gentleman, he actually worked on site for a while, and he was in a lease up in Arizona during COVID near the university, and they, like, I guess, like, hit a I don't know, a wall where leasing sort of like completely slowed down, and he had to get super creative. So he actually went, and they weren't student housing, like, they were close. So of course they wanted to attract student, but it wasn't like heads and beds type student housing. And so he went to all the fraternities and he started renting blocks of units in a row to the different frat and sorority houses. And he effectively made the apartment building like the second set of living spaces for those frat and sorority like lifestyles. And I was like, that is so interesting and cool and unique and outside the box. So I can only imagine then that, like, at that site, pool parties on the weekends and having things for kids to do was probably something that they focused on.
I think that makes sense. I love that. I ask only because I'm kind of casually seeing that trend, and I think what we were talking about this idea of, like, if you're focused more on retention, than you maybe have to shift, then are able to kind of lessen your marketing efforts in terms of, like, inbound leads. But I would think having those functions together in a company and not separated out would make the most sense.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely something that's going to change over the next year or two, even more.
We're pushing it big. Our company we were really pushing events this year. We haven't in the past. And I don't know how much it helps with retention, but what I do know is it creates a warm and fuzzy feeling.
Yeah.
That you do care. We had an event that we threw for everybody. We did National Bagel Day. It was a flop. We can't go 100 for 100, but we had a lot of really fun ideas we did in February that revolved around Valentine's Day. A lot of communities did pizza, whatever, and they knew their residents, and they had some success, painting parties, whatever. And it's not, yes, I think it's going to help retention, but I also think it gives you kind of just a warm and fuzzy that they want to do something for us at the community. And when we're not just paying rent, and they know the staff and people can go get to know each other if they want. Of course, events are self-selected. Some people want to go, some don't.
I was just gonna say, yeah, even if they don't, like, to Chris's point, even if they don't go, the feeling is still there. Like, oh, the community, this wasn't for me, but that's okay. The community still cares about me.
Or us.
I lived at a property that every year around Valentine's Day, they went to a local florist and brought in like hundreds of flowers. And then they had like bouquet making class. And I swear to God, every resident went. Like, I'm not kidding you. I never thought that making a bouquet, A, was that therapeutic, but B, brought so many people together. And then they would do like a Valentine's Day card making craft workshop. Everybody showed up. I was like, wow, like these are like, and it could have been that population, right? But I'd never seen, and they would post a flyer and just blast an email to all the residents, but the people like showed up. I was like, this is so neat. Like how I just think like too, we all are definitely aware, like the renters are gonna, like our cycle of renters and our age of renters is changing. And like, and like you, I mean, you both have littles now, but Anne, your kids are starting to become like tweens and teens and, you know, asking for cell phones, and pretty soon they'll be looking for apartments. And the capacity that they have information at the palm of their hand is so different than the way we did. And I think that is going to continue to change how we have to market and what we offer inside of communities, because I'm sure kids now, they see more, they experience more. I think people are doing a lot of different lifestyle activities younger, whether it's travel, you know, eating out. My niece is 13. Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts are like the commodity. I never would have thought to ask for Starbucks when I was 13. So like, it's changing and it's going to keep changing.
I'm right. I was going to ask Sarah for a final thought.
My final thought is I'm so glad we put the band back together. I think we should definitely do this live at a conference. I'm super excited to see you guys in person, you know, really soon. And I think if I could give like one piece of advice to all the listeners or our friends out there in the industry, I think it's just keep moving forward in the way we're moving, and don't be afraid to raise your hand and ask the question of what can I do to create a new efficiency inside of my organization. Even a small one of letting a team use ChatGPT to help proofread or write SEO copy, or integrate a technology that might have some of that stuff built into it, because I think all of it's just going to keep driving us forward.
Sarah, thank you. I feel like I learned so much as always. And we appreciate you letting us pick your brain for the last 45 minutes or so. Can't wait to see you in May at the AIM conference. Rumor has it that we are gonna do a roundtable together, the three of us.
We should bring on Mini Mike and do mini podcast interviews. I will totally help do that too.
Okay, that sounds like a blast. So
From AIM, it'll be fun.
yeah, we'll have a blast. So until next time, thank you to Chris, thank you to Sarah, thank you to Carlos, who of course, as always, makes us sound good. And until next time, this has been the Apartment Department.